For centuries, people in the cold forests of northern Europe built ships, halls, bridges and homes using wood that, well, modern builders would probably dismiss as too soft, too fragile, or just too temporary. Pine, spruce, fir and alder should not have survived wind, water, insects and rot for hundreds of years. Yet archaeological sites, medieval structures and preserved ship timbers tell a very different story. These woods were transformed through a method so effective that later observers described them as having turned to stone. This was not poetic exaggeration. It was actually the result of a deliberate multi-stage process perfected in the north long before modern chemistry existed, and, it explains why so much northern timber endured when logic says it should have failed. The northern method began not with tools, but with patience and climate. The first step of this forgotten method relied on winter itself. Northern woodcutters harvested trees during deep cold, often after the first hard freezes. At this stage, sap had retreated into the roots, leaving the trunk dry, sugar-poor, and, hostile to fungi. Freezing temperatures forced remaining moisture out of the cell walls, tightening the wood's internal structure. This freeze-drying effect hardened the fibres naturally, making softwood denser before it was ever shaped. You can actually apply this principle today by harvesting or purchasing logs that were cut in winter or during the dry seasons. Even store-bought lumber, believe it or not, benefits from being stored outdoors in cold, dry conditions before you use it. This allows moisture to leave gradually, rather than being trapped inside. Water immersion, it wasn't decay at all, but rather a controlled transformation. After felling, northern builders would often submerge softwood logs in cold rivers, lakes or bogs for months, or in some cases even years. Now, this might sound a bit destructive to modern ears, yet it was honestly one of the most powerful preservation techniques ever developed. Immersion, you see, leached out the sugars, starches and proteins that decay organisms feed on. At the same time, minerals from the water would slowly penetrate the wood, especially in those iron-rich bogs, binding with tannins and altering the wood's chemistry in a remarkable way. So this is how bogwood forms, and it's the reason why bog oak and bog pine are famously dense, dark and almost stone-like. Now, while full bog preservation takes centuries, even just a shorter immersion can really improve the wood's durability. A modern adaptation, you see, is soaking posts or beams in water for several weeks before drying them slowly, especially for anything that's going to be in contact with the ground. Slow drying, actually locked strength into the wood instead of tearing it apart. Once removed from water, the timber wasn't rushed into construction. Northern builders would let it dry slowly, often under cover but fully exposed to the wind. This whole process, it could take years. As water left the wood gradually, the cell walls collapsed inward rather than cracking outward, increasing density and hardness. Modern kiln drying forces moisture out rapidly, creating internal stress that, weakens softwood over time. If you want stronger lumber today, air drying remains superior for longevity projects. Stack boards with spacers, protect them from rain, and, give them time. This single change, dramatically alters how softwood performs decades later. One of the most misunderstood steps in the northern method was controlled charring. Builders would lightly burn the outer surface of beams, planks, and posts. This sealed the wood's pores, killed surface fungi, and created a carbon layer resistant to insects and moisture. Unlike deep burning, this process preserved the structural core while armouring the exterior. This technique, still used in parts of Scandinavia and Japan, can be applied today using a simple torch or fire pit. The key is even, shallow charring, followed by brushing and oiling. Fence posts, cladding and outdoor structures benefit immensely from this treatment. After charring, northern builders saturated the wood with pine tar, resin blends or boiled linseed oil. These substances penetrated deeply into the hardened fibres, remaining flexible in cold climates while repelling water. Unlike modern sealants, they did not trap moisture inside. Instead, they allowed the wood to breathe while staying protected. You can replicate this by warming natural oils or pine tar and applying them repeatedly to warm wood. Over time, the wood darkens, hardens, and becomes increasingly resistant to rot. You see, design choices ensured the wood never stayed wet long enough to fail. Roofs had steep pitches, beams were raised off the ground, and, airflow was constant. Moisture was allowed to escape quickly. Softwood treated this way could survive indefinitely, as long as it was allowed to dry between wettings. Modern builders can, adopt these principles by elevating posts, avoiding sealed joints, and prioritizing drainage over coatings. The northern method required time, space, and honestly, generational thinking. Industrialization replaced patience with speed and chemical shortcuts. Softwood was, redefined as disposable, even though, honestly, history proved otherwise. What was lost, you see, was not knowledge, but really the willingness to wait. For survivalists, homesteaders, and, serious history students, this method offers more than nostalgia. It provides a sort of roadmap for building with local materials that last, all without dependence on industrial supply chains. If this deep exploration helped you see old wood in a new way, please support the channel by subscribing, sharing this with fellow history enthusiasts, and, helping keep serious, research-driven storytelling alive.